Frederick Douglass.
I'm going to begin. Stop laughing. I'm going to begin with, if you will. Can I get anybody's an expert with taking pictures with the camera?
Donald, I'm going to take some pictures too.
Okay. Okay. And if it just happened to go off the password, which I don't usually tell people, but in this case, the password is 1828. And thank you so kindly. No, just take pictures. But you might have to move a little bit. For everybody else, I want to start off with, first of all, thank you all for being here on this awesome Saturday afternoon. As you know, that we're in the midst. Tomorrow is Juneteenth. And just to give you a little history, Juneteenth started being celebrated, or the city, state, started celebrating Juneteenth in the year of 1970. They thought it was very important that they recognized the fact that, you know, there were still some slaves who had not caught the word, if you will, that they were free. So I'm going to go through Mr. Douglass and him not knowing anything about Juneteenth. But I'm going to go through that. But I see some participants in the audience are going to be familiar with what I'm going to start off with. I'm going to start off with a song. And it has nothing to do with Frederick Douglass. In the summertime when the weather is hot. Anybody remember that song? I started off with that because it is hot. Okay? And just for the young people in here, all right? It's hot in here. Okay, anyway. Just a little bit of enlightenment. So, Frederick Douglass at the time was living in Rochester. And at this time, he had already been to the White House. He had befriended the president, who was no other than Abraham Lincoln at the time. With that said, in the year 1864, President Lincoln was on his way to be re-elected as President of the United States. When President Lincoln summons Frederick Douglass to the White House, this means that the presidential office paid for Mr. Douglass to travel from Rochester back to the White House. And during this time, as Mr. Douglass entered into or got to the front door, the guards there attempted to stop me from entering in. In their failure, or in their attempt, no other than my good friend, Mr. Lincoln, just happened to be walking by. Now you got to understand, the inauguration had just commenced. Mr. Lincoln, I believe, was on his way back to his office, and he was beginning to start his second term. When he walked by, he just happened to turn his head like we all do. We walk, we take a second look. Did I really see? So he backed up and he said, "Oh, my friend, Frederick Douglass!" And I waved, because I wanted to make sure he knew who he was calling. He said, "No, let him in. So I made my way to Mr. Lincoln. As I got to Mr. Lincoln, first thing he asked me, he says, "Frederick, how did you like my speech?" I responded and I said, "Well, Mr. President, it's not important how I like your speech. I'm sure there's other constituents who have greater words to speak in reference to your speech." The president responded back by saying, "You're right, Mr. Douglass. by the way, can I call you Frederick? I said, by all means, sir. He said, but your words, Frederick, is very important. So I want to hear personally your thoughts. So I told him my personal thoughts, and my personal thought was, you did good, sir. As we made our way to the office, Oval, we sat and we began to converse. And as I sat properly, I said, yes, sir, as he strolled around a little bit before he got comfortable in his seat. And he said, Frederick, I got a feeling. And I said, oh? He said, yes, I have a feeling that something is going to happen. I don't know what it is, but it's a feeling. I said, sir, I hope it's a good feeling. He didn't elaborate on it, but he just had a feeling. He went on to state that, you know, Frederick, I would like for you to round up some soldiers or some men. And I need you to take on a special mission for me. Now, I have you know that in my life up to this point, and we're talking past or after September the 3rd, 1838, and I'll get to that. I was very boisterous. And you very seldom saw me not saying a word other than if I was asleep. But what Mr. Lincoln said to me had me stumped. I didn't know what to say, and I didn't know how to act. I just didn't know what to do. And the only thing I could say in my mind was, he wanted me to round up some men? Me? What do I know about that? Well, he said, I need you to round up some men, and I need you to travel to Texas. Because I believe that there are some of your people who are innocently minus on the knowledge that they are free. And the only thing I could respond to say was, sir? He said, yes. But as I looked at him as he was speaking to me, I didn't see President Abraham Lincoln that was fluent, that was vibrant. Not the Abraham Lincoln that I was used to seeing and hearing. It was like something had just, I guess, escaped him. And for a lesser word, it was almost as if I was speaking to the ghost of President Abraham Lincoln. As I mentioned in this, and if you caught me earlier, I said that he seemed to have something even greater than going to Texas on his mind. He kind of looked in the future, sir, because he said that when the next president come along, I do not want him per se to have to deal with slavery. I want to put that to bed per se. I said, yes, sir. So I would move again, shake his hand, and I would get on the next train back to my residence and back to my family in Rochester, New York. April would come along, if you will, 1865 would come along. Mr. Lincoln and his beautiful wife, Mary, wanted to go take in a play. So they went to the Ford Theater. And quite naturally, any president that is out and about, 9 times out of 10, they have an armed force, armed guard, Secret Service watching over them. Something failed. And to be honest with you, Mr. Lincoln, in the booth that he was sitting in, was not the primary choice of him being in. I don't know how many of you all know of this gentleman, John Will Booth. Well, John Will Booth had another idea for the president. Did anybody know that? He had another idea for the president. Now, John Will, if you will, first of all, he was a performer, and an artist. So the play that was about to take place, he was supposed to be one of the intimate players in this play. And his scheme originally was to kidnap the President of the United States. But somehow, that was scratched. So he took it upon himself when he saw an opening to go up, sneak up into the booth. As Mr. President and his beautiful wife was enjoying the play. Now the stage was in this direction, if you will. I would say that's 12 o'clock, maybe 10 o'clock. Not 10, but 5 after, if you will. Okay, everybody's looking at me like, duh, all right? Well, as he was looking down to play, John Wilf came up behind him. Not to be graphic. When he came up behind him, he just put the gun. The next thing you know, the rest is history. Again, I was in Rochester at the time. Word traveled fast that the President of the United States was assassinated. It struck me in such a way that to this day, I cannot explain. But it struck me. I went back to the White House, and this time, it was the Vice President who was the President. Who was the Vice President at the time? Johnson. Johnson became President. And I'll have you know, me and my entourage, we traveled back to the White House to have a sit down with the new President of these United States, President Johnson. Now, I must go back before I get to him because of the fact that upon President Lincoln's inauguration, afterwards, he waved because I was up in the stand. Not only did he wave, but Vice President Johnson was sitting near him. And when he waved at me, Vice President Johnson had a wonderful smile on his face looking at President Lincoln. But then when he turned to look at who President Lincoln was waving at, and he saw this black face, his face turned into a frown. And I immediately said to my cohort that, hey, that man right there, he is no friend of ours. So when we met with him in the White House, then President Johnson, I have you know that in our face, ma'am, unlike today, I believe we're in the year 2022, correct?
Yes.
Now please understand, I asked that question because I've been asleep for over close to 130 years. As a matter of fact, I apologize to you, ma'am, and I apologize to you for getting so close because when I move, dust might fly over. So let me stand back so nobody gets you. I understand y'all just coming out of a pandemic, so I don't want y'all to be, oh, now I go stand next to him because he got a mask. Hi, my friend. Let me stop. Oh, she got a hi, my friend. Let me stop. She's like, oh, you have come, Mr. Frederick. While we were in the office, and it was myself along with some preachers, some well-known preachers from Rochester, I have you know that this president had the audacity to come out of his mouth and call us repeatedly the N-word. Not only that, he will call me a gang leader. Not only that, he would demand, get out of my office now and get off my property. His property was the property of America, the White House. Well, we did as such, and we left. But I have you know shortly after General Granger rounded up his troops, and he made it to Texas. And when he got to Texas, he alerted all those slaves that they were finally free. And that's how we came about what you all are celebrating, Juneteenth. I did not have an integral hand in the event, but there is a loose tie to me as Frederick Douglass and the beginning of what is known as Juneteenth. Unfortunately, though the word went out that we were free, I have you know, sir, even though we were free, we still had some of our people who refused to believe that they were free. And they believed that they were not free, and they refused to leave the plantation. So much so that the masters put them to work. And sir, they said, we will pay you. Yeah. So the slaves reckoned, we gonna get paid now. We's not working for free no more. Little do they know, the pay that they were seeking never came. Why did it never came? Because of the fact that all the work that those slaves did for these masters, the masters came up with the excuse that we're giving you room and board. We're feeding you. That is your pay. Now you must understand, a lot of those slaves were scared to what? Travel out. Because they didn't know anybody better. No education, no opportunities. Why would I leave an environment and step out when I have no proper utensils? Utensils, financial means. Utensils, shelter. Utensils, food and water. These are essentials that we need to survive. So these slaves wound up being used ever more, though they were what? Free. Happy Juneteenth. Allow me to divvy back into who I am and how I became. I was born on a plantation. The Lord's plantation. The Lord's plantation in eastern Maryland. Down by the Hillsborough River. Not the one here in Florida. I belong to the richest slave owner in the state of Maryland. Maryland, as you know, was considered the line, southern, northern line. The north of Maryland, you're free. The south of Maryland, you're a slave. The Lord's plantation was the richest plantation in the state of Maryland, meaning that the Lord's plantation had a total of 500 slaves. And please understand, in Maryland, there was no cotton. People believe that there was cotton. There was no cotton in the state of Maryland. However, there was, sir, tobacco, corn, wheat. These are the things that slaves would pick. And if they wasn't out picking that cotton, they were cutting wood. And yes, you had the house slaves. Yes, you had the maintenance slaves. Yes, you had the barn slave, the ones that took care of the animals. Oh, sir, can you give me a high five? Don't be scared. I won't leave no dust on you. Well, how you like this? The animals. Can somebody just shout out, what type of animals do you think I'm talking? Horses? Anybody else? Cows? Pigs? Sheep? Goats? Yeah, anybody else? Chickens? Alright? Now whoever making that sound, you better stop. Because Miss Stephanie, we're about ready to cut this thing loose. I'm going to Chick-fil-A. Anyway, I'm going to use today's word. I'm going to snitch on somebody. My man sitting back in the corner, he's like, I like this dude. I'm going to hang out with him. Frederick! Let me stop. Well, would you believe that slaves, ma'am, they did not know their birth. And I say that in such a manner that they may not have known their birth, but you better believe those animals did. Those animals were more important than the black folks that they had as slaves. Those slaves, when it went time to take care of their personal, their hygiene, they would use the local pond. This is the same exact pond that those animals we described earlier would use to properly what? Hygiene themselves. We as slaves, we got 2 sets of garments a year. The men, they would get 2 pair of pants, 2 pair of shoes, 2 shirts. The women, they would get 2 dresses. Well, what about kids? The kids would get 2 sets of garments. Pants and shirts for the boys? No, they both would get gowns. And if you outgrew that gown, hello to the wind. We had no proper eating utensils. What proper eating utensils am I speaking of? Forks, such as you have the luxury. Knives, such as you have the luxury. Plates, such as you have the luxury. Cups, such as you have the luxury. A table. Raise your hand if you've ever been to the beach. Raise your hand if you've been to the beach. Raise your hand if you ever went seeking after the seashells. The broken seashells. Well, if you recognize how they are shaped, well, we use those same type of seashells as our utensils when we would scoop up to scoop in. I believe that this morning somebody had a healthy breakfast. I believe that somebody in here had a breakfast consisting of eggs, bacon, pancakes, coffee, orange juice, and you're healthier because of that. Our breakfast consisted of slop, pig slop, or leftover meat from what the master would discard. My mother, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little emotional. My mother, Miss Harriet Bailey, they farmed her out. And I must say, before I go into my mother, that a lot of times, if you don't know, what the masters would do, they would take those black bodies down to the courtyard downtown and have them stand up on a little stool. And they would auction off these black bodies. Ma'am, they didn't care if you were family. The moral of the story is they did not care about a family, a black family. What they did care about is a black worker, a black slave. And would you believe when man would be there and they would auction off the man, put your arm up and they will feel, put your chest out and they will pack. Strengthen your legs and they will pack, and they will pack. Because that was the strength. How many of y'all ever seen a strong horse? And you look at their leg, the horse's leg, and you see all that muscle in there. That's what they were looking for. For the women, they would more or less do the same thing. Not so much to go out and pick cotton or go out and pick, but they wanted to know whether you fruity enough to have offsprings. So they can take your offsprings and separate them from the family to groom them, to grow them, so they can go where? To the field. So my mother, for what I understand, she was very, I don't know if the slave masters in here, but she was educated. My mother educated herself. She stole time to educate herself. How did she do that? Well, there was times that 3 times out of the week, sometimes 2 times out of the week, are you ready for this, man? She would escape and run through the woods barefooted 7 straight, sometimes 12 miles. And in her running, for what I was told, sometimes she would have a book. So when she got tired, she would relax on a tree trunk. Open that book up a little bit. Sir, she would read by the moonlight. Quite naturally, there was no electric as of yet. And she would make her way to see me in the pit of the dark. And the only time she would really see me if she had me by the window and the moon was shining bright. Ma'am, I had no knowledge. I just knew somebody was coming. And I do recall her singing to me. She would say, "My little Valentine, my little Valentine." They don't know my birth year, but somehow it was written up as February 14th. February 14th, you all celebrated as so I was her little Valentine. February 14th, 1818. A lot of you all know me as Frederick Douglass, but before there was a Frederick Douglass, there was a Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey. Now, if I can step out of character and step back into myself, I will say that my biological daddy was a Rolling Stone. No, he didn't sing with the Temptations. However, I have 2 sisters, and their last name is Bailey. No, I'm not putting them together, but I'm just saying. They say my father was a white man. Captain Aaron Anthony. Now, they called him Captain, ma'am, because on the weekends, he would go out on the Chesapeake, and he would get into his little sailboat. He would have his captain hat on. So he gained the name of Captain. Now, when I mention that, I have to make sure, there's a disclaimer, that, ma'am, no, there was no black men back then who owned a boat, ship, canoe, of any of that matter. So you know right there that my father was not what? Black. And though he knew I was his son, he did not treat me with specialties. He treated me like he treated the rest of the slaves. Because he didn't want the word to get out that, guess what? He'd been in the barn. Come to find out, sir, I had an older sister. You know what my older sister's name was? Lucretia. Yes, Lucretia was my older sister. That was his master, Andrew, and his wife, daughter. Now, the funny thing about it, sometimes when I would be hungry, like most of us slaves would be at times, Miss Lucretia, she would come to my rescue out of nowhere. That tells me that, ma'am, genes, G-E-N-E-S, is very strong. Somewhere in her heart, she had a liking for me because she always pulled me out of danger. She would always pull me out of starvation. She would always make sure, sir, that I got an extra piece of the apple pie. So Miss Lucretia was my sister. I can remember a time that my grandmother, Betty Bailey, now Betty Bailey, my grandmother, she took care of my master's family from start. She took care of the Lloyd's family from the start. She was allowed to work in the big house. She was allowed the extra freedom that other slave women were not allowed because she took care of the family. I remember she took me along with her one day, and we walked 20 miles. My feet started hurting. You know what she did, ma'am? She had the audacity. My grandmother had the audacity to pick me me up and put me on her back and carried me to our destination. We got to our destination. I believe her name was Miss Stacy, I think. Correct me, I'm sorry if I'm wrong, but I want to say Miss Stacy. Miss Stacy was somewhat a close friend of the family. Miss Stacy had an unliking for me. She would always beat me at any chance she got. I would scream and holler. And my grandmother would tell her, don't you never touch that boy again. My grandmother, this time, she told me, she said, Frederick, go out and play. How many of you all, if you will, if you're a grand, how many of you all got grandchildren that every time they come around you, they just want to hang on you every step? Matter of fact, you can't walk because they drag it on you. Anybody got grandchildren like that? That's a beautiful thing. Well, that's how I was with my grandmother, Betty Bell. But she told me, she said, Frederick, go out and play with the other children. No, Grandma, I don't want to go play. No, I started crying. Go, boy, leave me alone. Let us grown folks talk. Go play. No, I don't want to go. So she dragged me outside, and there was another young man, boy, that came out and said, come on, Frederick, let's play. He dragged me because I'm like, no. He finally got me outside. And after being out there for 5 minutes, I want my grandmama. Well, somebody went inside because they got tired of me crying. They went inside and they went to go get my grandmother. Come to find out, my grandmother was gone. And I really tore a fit. I must have got a whipping because I just started throwing things. Because I really love my grandmother. Somebody could let me say that, man. Crazy. Did he take his medicine this morning? Don't worry, I took it. Well, next thing I heard, sir, they had taken my grandmother and put her out in the woods by herself. Why? Because she had got old, and they figured that we didn't need her anymore. She can't serve us anymore. She's old and senile. So they put her out in the cabin by herself. And she passed away. And what hurt my heart is that when she passed away, they did not give her a proper burial. They just dug a hole. And they put her carcass in the hole. When I found out about it, it was maybe about 6-7 months later, it hurted. Well, somebody might ask, well, what about your mother? What happened to her? Well, I only saw her maybe 3 or 4 times, Harry. And when I got word, she had died. I'm about 7 years old now. But sir, when I caught word that my mother, Harriet, had died, there was no feeling. You may ask, why you didn't have feeling? That's your mother. She birthed you. Because I didn't know my mother. There was feeling for me when my grandmother died. Because we had a close relationship.